Hello, everyone, and welcome into the Star Wars Legends Lounge, the show that celebrates the books from Star Wars Legends. I'm Aaron Motes. On today's episode, Boba Fett, Dengar, and Neela track down the person who tried to set up Prince Shizor against the Empire. And it's the same person trying to eliminate them. Will they survive long enough to expose the conspiracy? We'll find out in today's book, The Bounty Hunter Wars, Hard Merchandise, by K.W. Jeter. And joining me to finish up the series, it's Jay. Jay, how are you today?
I'm doing all right. A little disappointed in the Blue Jays right now, but aside from that, not doing too badly.
Jay, we're at the end of the school year. Do you and your family have any plans coming up for this summer?
Not really yet. We have no trips planned. Hopefully try and get down to another Jays game or two. Uh, and then, maybe some beach days or yeah, we'll just sort of see what we can do day trip wise.
When you go to the beach up there near Toronto, are you just going down to the Great Lakes, or do you guys go out to the ocean? I mean, do you have to set up for like a 6 hour flight to go to the Atlantic Ocean or something?
Well, I'm fortunate. I live pretty much in cottage country, so there's lots of lakes all around me. So it's not a far trek to go find a nice beach.
Well, coming up here soon, my niece and nephew have asked me to go on vacation with them. So I am going to Disney World. So we'll see what that's all about. I was just, my niece and nephew, they're young teens, and for some reason they asked me to come along. So I figured, pretty soon they're probably not going to do much with their old Uncle Aaron. So I might as well, if they're going to ask me, I might as well take them up on it.
Well, I'm sure they want their cool Uncle Aaron with them. Who's got to show them all the cool Star Wars stuff and Disney. Come on.
Maybe. Like I said, I was there when I was young. My brothers and I, my parents took us when we were really young. That was like 1986, I think. I think I was like 8. So I don't really remember much. The one thing that everyone in the family remembers, except for my youngest brother Brian, because he was too young, is there was a day we were trying to find the rental car in the parking lot, and it was the worst downpour we had ever been in. And we must have been running around in the rain for 15 to 20 minutes. None of us could remember what aisle we were in, what row we were in.
It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
It was hilarious. And of course, 86, we didn't have key fobs. You couldn't just run around and bleep, 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 bleep. You're just running around looking for this Oldsmobile Cutlass somewhere that we had rented at the airport. It was fun. That's one of the things that all of us remember.
Well, I would love to take my kids to Disney, and I have actually never been. So if I ever get a chance to go, it'll be my first time. So yeah, go enjoy. I think it may have changed a little since 1986.
Yeah,
Uh, but you definitely got to go to the Star Wars area. Like, come on.
sure. Yeah, I plan on it. Now, I hear from your wife that you're going to be expecting a new member of the family soon. Is that true?
Yeah, in a couple of weeks, we are getting a puppy, and his name is Remy. So
Remy.
Remy, named after Gambit.
Nice.
Yeah, we're pretty excited. We're now scrambling to get the house ready for him, and the kids got a chance to meet him and his siblings the other day, and they all had a blast.
I'm sure Thor and Loki are bouncing off the walls. They
Oh,
can't wait until Remy comes home.
they can't wait. They're like, when is he coming? When is he coming? And we're like, not yet. He's not quite old enough.
Yeah, I saw a couple pictures that your wife put up on her Instagram page, pictures of the kids with Remy. It was very, very, very cute little dog. I like the spots on his nose.
That was one of the reasons why we picked him was he had that little pink spots on his nose, made him stand out from everyone else.
Well, we could talk between ourselves all day, but I'm sure the listeners are here to hear us talk about the last book of the Bounty Hunter Wars trilogy. Before we get to that, though, let's take a listener question. Today's email comes from Robin in Germany, who says, "One of my friends thinks Disney's Star Wars has become a parody of itself, unable to tell a story that we haven't seen before. The problem with Disney is they do not create new things to challenge the audience. Most of the new characters are like mirror images of things from the past. We have seen Death Stars, Vader clones, Tatooine Jedi, Tarkin, Leia, and Rebels again and again. What is your opinion?" Well, thank you very much for the email, Robin. Jay, what do you think? Is everything in Star Wars just a repeat of something that's happened before?
I think just about all entertainment is something that we've seen before. It's what keeps it interesting is how people reinvent those same stories and find a new way to tell it. I think Star Wars, in many respects, has done that. I think we've gotten some excellent characters in the sequel trilogy, in the prequel trilogy, in the TV series. Yes, some of the characters may be reminiscent of, you know, a lower powered Darth Vader, or you know, uh, a homespun, Obi-Wan Kenobi. I don't think that dilutes it, because people in general tend to be very similar. They, when they're trained a certain way, will react in a certain way. And I think if the creators go too far from what we know as Star Wars, they're going to get called out on that too for it not feeling like Star Wars. So I think they have a very tight line that they kind of have to balance on, trying to incorporate new stories and give us new things, but also being true to what's already been established.
So I agree with a lot of that. I would say that Star Wars, it's never been a new story in and of itself. It's borrowed from other fantasy stories, science fiction stories, political stories, war stories. And even though it is a bit of a soap opera, it mirrors how things in the real world work on these cycles. History repeats itself. Well, entertainment repeats itself. Two things. One, I do think there are some new things. I think they are telling some things in a different way. I think two stories like Rogue One and Andor would not have been stories that Star Wars would have told when George Lucas ran the company. The High Republic book series, there are quite a few new aspects of the Force in there, in my opinion. Heck, we had a kids' game show on YouTube hosted by Ahmad Best. So there are some new things in Star Wars. I'm interested in the new show that's going to be coming up here very soon, The Acolyte. We haven't really had a Star Wars show told nominally from the bad guy's point of view. I may not be the best person to answer this, Robin, because personally, if every story they gave me was between the Clone Wars and the end of Return of the Jedi, I'd be happy. That's my favorite time in Star Wars. I just want all aspects of it. But I think really what your friend may need to do is ask, what does challenge the audience mean in Star Wars? How do you challenge the audience while making movies and television shows that are family friendly? Because let's face it, you're not going to make a hard R Star Wars movie or show that 12-year-olds aren't going to be allowed to go to. They're just not going to do it. So how do you challenge the audience in that case? Thanks again for the email, Robin. Listener, if you have a question for the show, you can email me at swlegendslounge@gmail.com, or You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky, all at SW Legends Lounge. And if you'd like to get your voice on the show, just record a short message and email it in. But please record it in MP3 audio format. Now it's time to wrap up the Bounty Hunter Wars trilogy with today's book, Hard Merchandise by K.W. Jeter. Listener, grab yourself a drink. Let's head in to the Star Wars Legends Lounge.
The story begins on the Houndstooth. Boba Fett, Dengar, and Neela continue traveling through the Outer Rim. Neela confronts Boba Fett and demands the bounty hunter to fill her in on his plan. No, Boba Fett says. He tells Neela that he'll let her and Dengar in on his plans when they need to know. Boba Fett says what's important is that Neela understand that she is valuable to him at this moment. If she wants to know more, he says to talk to Dengar and let him finish his story.
3 years before, Prince Shizor arrives at the web of Kudar Mubat, demanding to know the whereabouts of Boba Fett. Soon, says the assembler, he'll be here soon, and he has your traitorous stormtrooper. Shizor smiles, and not just because he'll be able to eliminate the bounty hunter, but he soon won't have to deal with Kudar Mubat anymore. It's time to eliminate the old assembler and install a new one in its place.
Boba Fett arrives at the web and prepares to turn the stormtrooper over to Kudar Mubat. Before he can dock, something slams into Slave One, ripping a hole in its flank. It's Prince Shizor and his flagship. Boba Fett takes evasive action, but his engines are slow to respond. Another blast rocks the ship, damaging its flight controls. One more blast like that, and Slave One will be destroyed. That leaves Boba Fett with one choice, diverting all remaining power to the engines. Boba Fett rockets Slave One forward, straight into Kudar Mubat's web.
Boba Fett emerges from the wreckage of Slave One and turns the stormtrooper over to Kudar Mubat. But the assembler is in rough shape. The collision of Boba Fett's ship ripped parts of his neural network apart. When Prince Shizor arrives, Fett pulls his blaster and demands his payment. Shizor laughs at Boba Fett, but he respects the Mandalorian's audacity. Shizor calls for Kudar Mubat's little accountant node balance sheet to pay the bounty hunter. When the assembler objects, Shizor laughs again. He says he won't be dealing with Kudar Mubat anymore. He's making balance sheet the new assembler. Boba Fett leaves just before Shizor and balance sheet return to the Black Sun battlecruiser. The prince orders the cruiser to open fire, destroying the web and Kudar Mubat.
Turning to the present, Boba Fett calls Neela and Dengar together. Now that Neela knows the whole story of the breakup of the Bounty Hunters Guild, Boba Fett says she's ready for some answers. He doesn't know Neela's real name, but he knows where they can find out. The Houndstooth returns to real space in the middle of a debris field. Small pieces of rock and junk bounce off the front view screen. "Where are we?" Neela asks. "This is the remains of Kudar Mubat's web," Boba Fett says. "This is where we'll get some answers."
Boba Fett and Dengar run cables from the Houndstooth to Kudar Mubat's inner lair. They briefly reanimate the former assembler, but Kudar can't give them any usable information. Just then, Balance Sheet arrives in a small cargo transport. Boba Fett, Neela, and Dengar ask the little assembler who it is that wants them dead. Balance Sheet says he doesn't know, but it's because Boba Fett found something years ago on Tatooine. Fake evidence implicating Prince Shizor on the attack at Luke Skywalker's childhood home. The information Boba Fett found came from the planet Kuat, and now it's back on Tatooine. It turns out, when Boba Fett tricked Bosk into abandoning his ship, the Trandoshan was smart enough to grab the data disk he stole off of Slave One.
Boba Fett finds Bosk in a cantina in Mos Eisley. Sneering, Bosk says he knew the Mandalorian would return sometime. Fett pulls his blaster and orders Bosk to hand over the disk he took from Slave One. No, Bosk replies. Go ahead. Shoot. I'm not doing your bidding anymore. The cantina goes still, with all the eyes staring at Boba Fett and Bosk. Eventually, the Mandalorian lowers his blaster. He nods. Congratulations, Boba Fett says. You've won. Now give me the disk. Fett tosses Bosk a few credits. Stunned, Bosk tells Boba Fett where he hid the disk. Fett finds it, leaves Tatooine, and heads off to rendezvous with Dengar and Neela.
At the Kuat drive yards, Kuat of Kuat meets with a group from the Rebel Alliance. Kuat asks why the rebels aren't with the rest of the fleet at Endor. The commander says they were sent there to ensure the Empire can't use the ships at the shipyard to reinforce their fleet. Actually, they'd prefer if Kuat would give the ships to the Alliance, but they don't have the money to pay for them. After leaving the meeting, Kuat gathers his foremen. He tells them to set explosives throughout the shipyards. Kuat will not allow the rebels to steal these ships.
Houndstooth arrives at Kuat, but it's stopped by the planetary security forces, and its commander Kodir of House Kuluvat. Kodir confiscates Boba Fett's data disk and takes Neela into custody. After they return to Kodar's ship, she orders her forces to let the Houndstooth go. Boba Fett's grievance is with Kuat of Kuat, and if the Mandalorian has his vengeance, there will be an opening for someone new to run the Kuat drive yards. Someone like Kodir of House Kuluvat.
Just as Boba Fett and Dengar head deeper into the system, everything falls apart. Explosions start to rip through the shipyards, blowing apart gigantic scaffoldings, twisting girders, and set many of the ships aflame. The rebel fighters race into the shipyards, trying to save as many of the ships as they can. But Boba Fett has his eye on something else, the only Star Destroyer under repair. The Mandalorian docks with the Star Destroyer and tells Dengar to take the Houndstooth and flee. Boba Fett finds Kuat of Kuat on the ship's bridge. He has two questions for the technician. First, why did Kuat fabricate the evidence implicating Prince Shizor in the raid of Luke Skywalker's home on Tatooine? Shizor wanted control of Kuat drive yards, Kuat says. I couldn't allow him to have it. Second, Boba Fett asks why Kuat erased Neela's memory and hid her on Tatooine. But the technician denies the accusation. He then turns and leaves the bridge, returning to the crumbling shipyards.
On the security ship, Kodir and Neela watch as the Kuat drive yards go up in flame. We can rebuild, Kodir says, with House Kuluvat in control. Neela stares at Kodir. I know who I am, she says. My name is Katil of House Kuluvat, and I know you're the one who erased my memory. Of course, Kodir says. I had to get you out of the way if I wanted to rule our house. Kodir then reaches for her blaster, but quickly, Neela moves closer. She bashes Kodir in the gut, followed by a punch to the face. One quick turn on the wrist, and Neela yanks the blaster away from Kodir. Neela turns the traitor over to the Kuat security forces to face a trial by the other ruling families.
The rebels escape the Kuat drive yards with a few ships, 4 Lancer-class frigates and a couple Nebulon B frigates. As they fly away from the destruction, the commander watches as the one Star Destroyer in the dock starts to slowly move forward. Quickly, it builds up speed, flies straight through the chaos, and emerges from the flames, rocketing past the rebels, and out to the edges of the system. Awestruck, the commander turns to one of his officers. Too bad that one's not one of our guys.
Story ends with Boba Fett and Neela saying their goodbyes on the Kuat security ship. Boba Fett asks Neela to give him the data disk with the fabricated evidence against Prince Shizor. But the war is over, with the Emperor and Vader dead. Neela asks him why he wants the disk back. Insurance, he tells her, just in case I run into some of the remnants of Black Sun. Boba Fett returns to the Houndstooth to find Dengar and his fiancée Manaroo. The two leave on her ship, allowing the Mandalorian to head off to Tatooine to recover Slave One.
Time to take a break. When we return, Jay and I will talk more about the Bounty Hunter Wars, hard merchandise. I'm Aaron Moats. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. Thank you for listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge, where we celebrate the books from Star Wars Legends. But let me recommend a book from Star Wars canon. Jedi Battle Scars tells the story of Cal Kestis and the crew of the Stinger Mantis following the events of Jedi Fallen Order. The crew meets a former stormtrooper who has information that could prove crucial for the rebellion. But can the Imperial deserter be trusted? And can Cal evade pursuit from the evil fifth brother? Find out in Jedi Battle Scars by Sam Maggs. Welcome back to the Star Wars Legends Lounge, the show that celebrates the books from Star Wars Legends. I'm Aaron Moats, and today, Jay and I are talking about the third and final book in the Bounty Hunter Wars trilogy, Hard Merchandise by K.W. Jeter. All right, Jay, we've wrapped up this series. You enjoyed the first two books. How did you enjoy this book?
Found this one a little bit faster paced. Maybe that was because it wasn't bouncing between timelines. But overall, I think it's a great series, and I think we really get to see sort of that mythos of Boba Fett in this series, and just how calculating he is, and that he isn't just, a gun that's capable of things. He actually thinks things through, and generally has all his bases covered. It's very rare that someone gets one over on him because he hasn't gotten the information that he needs. And that's happened a little bit with Bosk and both Kuat in this trilogy, but those seem to be rare occurrences in Boba Fett's illustrious career.
I think you probably enjoyed this trilogy more than I did. What was your overall opinion of the series?
I mean, it was all right. I don't think it's the best Star Wars books out there. I don't think it's the worst. I think it just kind of falls in the middle, in my opinion. Um, I don't think they're terrible, but maybe just average on the scale of some of the other series that are out there.
Well, that I would agree with. There are books that I don't like as much as these. I would put these somewhere in the middle. One thing I will say, though, is I'm not sure this needed to be a trilogy. I think the story that was told could probably have just been told in 2 books with a little bit of editing. Because I think we talked about it more in the second book, Slave Ship, especially in the present day timeline. Hardly anything really happened. They were just on the ship telling the story. So maybe this series would have worked better for me if it just moved a little faster. I think the pacing was just a little too slow for what I enjoy in reading a Star Wars book.
No, I can agree with that. I do agree that it probably could have been 2 books and not necessarily needed a trilogy. Um, But the old EU stuff, a lot of it seemed to be written as, whether intended or not, trilogies. And I think that may just be because they were trying to emulate the movies.
Sure. Sometimes it works out well, and sometimes it's to its detriment. It doesn't need to be a trilogy. All it needs to be is how many pages the author needs to tell the story.
Exactly. Um, but and maybe that's something that they learn through that process, right? That maybe they only need one book. Maybe it needs 19 books to tell the story. Maybe it needs several authors to tell the story and not just one. Um, but we're also talking early days of the EU here, or of the Legends timeline, I should say. And you know, they I think we're still really learning and just trying to get stories out there on people's favorite characters.
Yeah, this would have been in the mid to late 90s when it was still Bantam Spectra publishing these books. Bantam Spectra would lose the publishing license in 99. So you're right. It's still a bit of a feeling out period on what exactly Legends was at the time. One of the things I did enjoy with this series was the introduction and then I guess eventually the death of the assembler, Kudar Mubat, and of course his little assembler, Balance Sheet. That was something I really enjoyed. I don't. How did you like the assemblers?
It's very different. Um, as I said in a previous episode, I got very Matrix vibes from it, and I know at the time that Matrix wasn't even a thing yet. Um, but even remotely in the Star Wars universe, having someone that has that many connections and you know information brokering, and it is a very compelling character. It's a character that they could very easily throw into a story now, and it wouldn't seem out of place.
I think in modern canon, if you put the assemblers in something like the Dr. Aphra comic series, that series gets weird and wild. That would fit in perfectly in that series.
Yeah, I think you could even throw that into like Ahsoka or something like that too. Like that could be a creature in another galaxy that we haven't seen yet that has abilities to get information across the universe.
What did you think about the reanimation scene? That was I guess, for me, the only time when the books were focused on Kudar Mubat that may have just went a step too far for me, but I appreciated how weird it was. What did you think of it?
It definitely was weird. Um, but again, I don't know. Maybe it's just because I can't really picture what that creature looks like, and the fact that it devours itself and creates itself anew, all internally, right? So,
Maybe. I know
like,
sometimes it was described as spider-like. They kept
yeah.
talking about a web. And if you go on Wikipedia, it has a picture of a spider. So I always just in my head pictured some sort of gigantic spider-like creature. That's what I pictured.
Well, I did too, but when they talk about how the web and Kudar Bubat are almost one entity, and that even Balance Sheet is an extension of Kudar Marbat, and that Kudar Marbat devoured his predecessor and then took over the web. So that's what I mean. Like, it seems like it's a continuing thing located in that one spot. So, like, trying to picture just what that race looks like and how it, procreates, or if it even procreates, it's strange. So the fact that, you could plug it in after it's supposedly dead and get information from it, makes it almost seem like it's droid-like, but maybe cyborg. I don't know. Like it's maybe like living machinery. I don't know.
Yeah, that, as I said, that may have been the one thing that was a little too far for me, but I at least appreciated that it was something different. It was something strange. And from the listener question we had at the beginning of the show, if Robin's friend wanted something new and weird, that's kind of new and weird.
Right? And again, you know, how do you expand a story that we already know, are familiar with into avenues that we're not familiar with and make it seem fresh, right? You know, there was a bunch of, I think at that point there was a few Boba Fett comments out, so there was already some established canon for him. So you have to take that plus the fan popularity plus, you know, and churn out a story, but make sure that it doesn't actually include any of the main characters that we're used to dealing with.
We had spoken previously that we thought Balance Sheet was going to take over. He does, with the help of Prince Shizor. Balance Sheet, there's definitely a part of Kudar Mubat in there, but Balance Sheet at least doesn't speak the way Kudar Mubat spoke, you know, with a lot of floral language, buttering up the person that Kudar Mubat was talking to. Balance Sheet is pretty matter of fact when it talks to people. Did you find it interesting that Balance Sheet didn't want to start making its own web with its own little nodes? Like, it realized the reason that Kudar Mubat failed was because of the nodes. So Balance Sheet was just going to ride around in this cargo transport all by itself and not create anything.
Yeah, I thought that was actually great. He was the one that learned, right? He calculated the odds, I'm sure, because he's an accountant.
Yeah, exactly. And really, so, I mean, he's still, the way they describe him, he's not much bigger than my laptop that I'm sitting here talking to you on. So someone could squash him, someone could shoot him, someone could blow up his little cargo transport, but he at least doesn't have to worry about a revolution from within.
I mean, that's true, but I'm actually kind of surprised Boba Fett didn't blow him out of the sky when he stole all his credits from him.
Half. He stole half. He at least gave Boba Fett half.
You know, that kind of surprised me because Boba Fett made it very clear that no one screws with his money, and he again that was one of those instances that he was not expecting that, and you know, kind of paid the consequences. But I'm kind of surprised that violent streak in Boba Fett didn't turn around and fire some cannons from Slave One at that little cargo ship.
True. The one thing that Balance Sheet has going for him is it controls valuable information. So if you destroy Balance Sheet, some of that information is gone. So it at least has some leverage on other ne'er-do-wells in the galaxy. I think both of us agree that the most interesting aspect of the saga was Neela's story. Who wiped her memory, deposited her on Tatooine, and why? We speculated a little bit last episode. I think my second prediction ended up being pretty close. I did say it was probably Kodir. That was my second one, though. At first, I thought it may have been Kuat, but it turns out it was Kodir, and it was just internal ruling house politics. She wanted to rule the house, and Neela was in the way. It just so happens she didn't hire a very good person to get Neela out of the way. So, but what did you think of the way that story wrapped up? I was actually pretty satisfied with the way that story wrapped up. It made logical sense. I liked the confrontation the two had. I like how Neela got her memory back during the conversation with Balance Sheet. What did you think?
I think that it did the the web of that story all kind of came together very cohesively, and it ended well. I was a little shocked it was Kadir. I thought that seemed a little too obvious, um, but apparently that's what I should have expected.
Sometimes the simplest answer is the correct answer. Like you, I was thinking it was something else first. But if you think about it, this is the simplest answer. And it makes logical sense. And dramatically, it really worked for the story.
Yep. Yeah, it really did. You know, and I'm sure it's probably some of my other readings that you have done as well, reading the Song of Ice and Fire stuff, where that simple solution seemed too simple. Um, and, you know, but yeah, it worked. It was well done, and Neela in the end showed that she was a formidable foe. So
I guess the question going forward, now that Kodir has been apprehended and she is being turned over to stand trial, Kuat presumably is dead, having gone down with the shipyards that he blew up. I'm interested to see if anything else comes from this. Will we see in future stories if Katil of House Coolvault now runs Kuat Drive Yards, or if it's someone else from one of the other ruling families? Because the only thing we do know is in the second book, it says that Kuat has no heirs.
hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't remember from way back when if we ever encounter that again. I
I don't
know
either.
I do know that the co-op drive yards are still a predominant, you know, entity in the Star Wars universe. Um, like to the point where I don't actually recall ever reading that it was ever destroyed. So it was kind of that kind of took me back a little bit, and I was a little stunned because throughout the course of other readings, that seems to be where the New Republic gets their ships mostly. Um, so I don't know, maybe that was just one of those things that it didn't link up to other stories, or maybe people missed that part. I don't know.
Or maybe the destruction wasn't as all encompassing as the way you and I interpreted the book. Or it could just be the planet Kuat rebuilt fairly quickly.
Yeah, I mean, if that's their livelihood, right? So they would make sure that a lot of money goes into it to get it fixed, so that they can start selling more ships to whoever needed them.
Do you think it was realistic that Kuat of Kuat was willing to blow up the shipyards and all the ships in it just because the Alliance was kind of wanting to just commandeer the ships that were, well, let's just say it. They wanted to commandeer it. They wanted Kuat, out of the goodness of his heart, to give them these ships. And cynically, you might as well say it, that's not how the world works. Big corporations, big companies play both sides. Kuat was playing both sides, selling to both the Empire and the Rebel Alliance. So he wasn't just going to give them these ships. If they wanted to buy them, sure, he'd sell them to them. So does it seem like it makes sense that he was willing to blow the whole thing up?
I think I interpreted it a little bit differently because I kind of got the feeling that he was kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place where if he, even him talking to the rebellion, would have gotten him in a lot of trouble with some of the other houses because he had been very staunch in saying we will not support that. Where some of the other ruling houses were like, well, no, like we need to. Um, and I think with the battle at Endor happening, he really, it really was a miracle that the rebellion pulled that off. So I think he was looking at it that way, going, if the rebellion loses and the Empire comes a calling, how do I justify this? Um, so I think partially he blew it up because then he's got a scapegoat, right? Oh, well, the rebellion attacked, so in order for them not to get the ships, I blew everything up, right? It was his cover story if the Empire came back. Um, he could, and if the rebellion somehow pulled off a miracle, he could turn around and go, well, he was forcing me to try and uh, do something that I wasn't able to do. Like I think he just found himself a really easy scapegoat with blowing everything up. He could weave whatever story he wanted.
Hmm. That makes sense. Well, let's get to Boba Fett himself. Cynically, I put a question on our show notes that said, is this really a Boba Fett story? Now, Boba Fett was the main character. He was in the story most of the time. Still, part of me feels like in the present storyline, it was more of a Neela story. And in the past storyline, it was more of a story between, well, at least that one, it was closer to a story between either Bosk and Boba Fett or Shizor and Boba Fett, depending on the time. But I don't know, just there were parts of me during this series that it didn't feel like it was a Boba Fett centric story.
I would agree with that. I would definitely say the past definitely focused a lot more on Boba Fett and the relationships he had with people around him. Um, the the present, I would definitely say probably like Boba Fett, and maybe that's because he was near death for the first part, was a passenger for a good chunk of this story, um, and it really seemed more like Neela and Dengar were the main characters in the present storyline until until that moment that Boba Fett put his armor on and then he kind of became that central figure again and steering for lack of a better term, the ship into the course that they needed to head.
Yeah. I also, so when these books were published in the mid to late 90s, if all of your experience with Boba Fett was the original trilogy, to me, he seemed way too talkative in this series. Like, there would be pages where he would be talking to Neela and talking to Dengar. And, from just the little bit that he's in The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, he doesn't say much. Most of what our imaginations had come up with for Boba Fett was, in my opinion, this almost silent Western type gunslinger, bounty hunter. And there are parts of this book where he's kind of a chatterbox. Did it feel like Boba Fett to you?
I mean, I did like
I
Boba
no,
Fett's
maybe I worded that wrong. in many instances, it feels like Boba Fett to me, except for how much he likes to talk in this story. That one characteristic just seemed off to me.
Yeah, again, how do you write a series with the main character who doesn't speak, right? That makes makes it hard to have them as a central figure. But I always found that even when he was speaking, he was still very direct with what he was saying. It wasn't like he was being, he wasn't telling stories so much. He said what needed to be said in as many words as it needed to be said. Like he wasn't really, you know, here, let me tell you an anecdote about this one time, back in a cantina. Like he was still, this is the job, this is what you need to know, this is what I'm telling you.
All right. All right. And listener, I understand I have been a little more critical of this series than I normally am. But that's not to say there isn't some really cool Boba Fett stuff in this series. In this book alone, you have the standoff in the cantina with Bosk. That's a pretty cool scene. You also have when he's piloting the Star Destroyer out of the Kuat drive yards as it's blowing up all around him. That's a really cool scene in the story. So please don't take my criticisms as though this story is terrible or not. It's not. I like this story more than some other stories in Legends that I've either read before or will be reading going forward. Just there are aspects of this saga that are just slow. That's why I started the discussion section here saying that I'm not really sure this needed to be a trilogy. I think you could have cut a lot of the flashbacks out. I think you could have cut a lot of the conversations out and probably trimmed this to 2 books and would have gotten the same exact story. It just would have moved faster.
Yeah, I agree with that, Eric. Like I don't think this needed to be a trilogy. And even just after what you said, I'm sure it probably could have been a single book, just maybe a little longer than your standard 350 pages. Um, if this was a 600 page, book, I think it would have accomplished everything that the trilogy did. And maybe sped things up a little bit, maybe made things a little bit more interesting. Um, and I think that would have worked a lot better than, having to drag out a present situation that, you know, barely even features half the characters for an entire book.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Jay, it's time to wrap up. Thank you so much for talking about these books with me over the last 3 episodes.
I'm so glad that I was able to come back and do this. It's always fun talking Star Wars with you. And when I was reading these books and they were coming out, and I really didn't have that many people to talk to them about them. So I'm so happy to come back and do it.
And if everything goes well, you're coming on next year for Legacy of the Force, correct?
I sure, absolutely.
We have to get Scott on for that, though. We have to
Yeah,
get Scott to agree to that.
yeah, we definitely do. But yeah, that I would definitely love to rejoin you for that series.
I hope so. I hope everything works out. Now, before we go, if listeners would like to get in touch with you, or if they would like to listen to your podcast, Animated Antics, how can they do that?
You can listen to us on Spotify. You can find us on Twitter at JandCat1. You can email us at animatedantic0@gmail.com. You can find us on Instagram and Blue Sky at Animated Antics Pod. And I think that's everywhere we are currently. So yeah.
What show are you going to be covering next?
We are going to be covering season 2 of Invincible.
Oh, well, I'll be looking forward to that episode then.
So
I
yeah,
do.
that's
I look forward to all your all's episodes, even though I would say half of the shows that you guys have covered so far, I've never seen.
I'm glad that we have some fans out there. It's great. I know we haven't gotten to your recommendation. What was it? The Golden Castle or Golden
The
Tower or something
Mysterious
like that?
Cities of Gold?
Yeah, that one. We haven't been able to find that one yet, Aaron, but if we find it, we want you as a guest.
I have a feeling you guys are going to have a difficult time trying to find this one season early 80s show that was originally from Japan that was brought over to the U.S. And it's about looking for the mysterious cities of gold when the explorers were coming over in the 1500s to the New World. So
Well,
it was a one series, but for some reason when I was a kid, I loved that one season show.
hey, if we can find it, we'll cover it for you, Aaron, so you can talk about it, gush about it.
Awesome. Awesome. Listener, if you would like to contact this show, you can email me at swlegendslounge@gmail.com, or you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky at swlegendslounge. Ask me a question, send me your favorite Star Wars character groups. And if you've ever seen The Mysterious Cities of Gold, let me know if you've seen The Mysterious Cities of Gold. Jay, thank you very much for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me, Aaron. Again, it's been a blast. I love talking Star Wars with you.
Now, coming up on the next episode, I'm going to talk about one of the more maligned novels in Legends, Star Wars Galaxies, The Ruins of Dantooine by Veronica Whitney Robinson. Let me tell you this, listeners. Do not judge this book by its cover. You can hear that episode coming out on June 14th. Thank you so much for listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. I'm Aaron Motes. May the Force be with you. And remember, there's always a bit of truth in Legends.